Good morning.
Hello.
This is August 12th, 2020, and this is episode 77 of Transmission.
Bum, bum, bum.
And
I've got my second do-it-yourself pandemic haircut, which I'm very proud of.
You're very aerodynamic right now, which will make it easier for you to run from the police.
I'm going through
the revolution.
That's right, through the wind tunnel of life.
We're not going to go over today, just letting everyone know. We have been, because I have a slab of concrete waiting for me.
That's
it's gonna rain, and I've never poured concrete before, so this is a rite of passage. After today, I will achieve the next level of enlightenment.
Yes.
Or I'll lose my shit and start swearing.
Concrete nirvana.
Nice.
Wow. I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination. And today
we're talking about behavior on the internet today.
Yeah, racism, Christian progressivism, lots of things touched on this. And this is, as a way of setting this up, I encourage everyone who's listening to visit Lace on Race, LACE on RACE, as a Facebook page, and follow Lace Watkins stuff there. So this is the setup. There's this page called The Christian Left, which, this is my snarky caveat. Almost everyone who claims to be Christian left should generally, like on Facebook, it's usually as some sort of Christian middle. Like left in America. Left is such a big term. Left in America usually means center. Leftist internationally usually means redistribution of wealth. Like that's kind of, it's the Marxist. But anyways, so Christian Left, a progressive Christian page, has several 100,000 followers, sells merchandise, which is okay. I mean, that's selling anything is always fraught with peril because we live in an unethical economic system. Get that. But they were selling like masks and T-shirts with the words "good trouble" on there, which is a quote from John Lewis. And John Lewis recently died, and so profiting off of his words, which, we create memes. I create memes all the time with different people's words, and so I could imagine making a T-shirt with Oscar Romero's words on it, like not necessarily problematic that much in and of itself. But Lace asked, "Hey, where's the money go, and who's in charge of this website? Is it a white-led website? What do you think about this?" A hard question, but a fair one. And they reacted with huge defensiveness, the admins there. They deleted comments. They blocked people, said you're trolling. And that was just when it was still at that level of still respectful in the generic sense. Then, Lace organized a response saying, you can't just not be transparent about this stuff. And so myself, lots of other people started posting things on the Christian Left page, tagging them and some of their admins, just to you need to make good on this. You have to respond to a reasonable question with a reasonable answer instead of silencing people and throwing another. Eventually, they decided to take down the merch, but are still playing it as though they were attacked by an army of social justice warriors, and that this is an example of cancel culture. That's been the reaction. And if you look at the different comments on the page, the only comments that are allowed to stay up are the ones where they talk about their victimhood. None of the challenging posts are up. And to me, this is understandable. It's not like I haven't done the thing that the Christian Left page has done before. I mean, I've been reactionary and defensive and done stupid shit that made double down on my racism and my bullshit before. So it's understandable, but it shows and reveals kind of a dynamic, not only online, but in the larger world, about what does it mean to be in solidarity if you're a white person. So we want to talk.
Yeah. And I guess I would also go back to, when you said, well, I could see putting some words on a T-shirt or whatever. I do think that that there is also an issue in this of the immediate capitalization of almost everything
Yes.
that is to me worth reflecting on and is problematic. And we have seen this in a big way right here. I mean, within 2 days of George Floyd being murdered, there's I Can't Breathe masks, there's I Can't Breathe T-shirts, there's people hawking this stuff all over the place. There is to me something very painful about the fact that we take anything, almost anything human, and commoditize it. And we have there's no space, right? There's no space for authentic mourning, authentic relationship. It's just immediately, how can I make money off of this? And that is to me an incredibly toxic aspect of our culture. And so within a couple days of John Lewis dying, I mean, I have seen tons of merchandise for sale with this phrase on it. And I find that really painful. I mean, for one thing, why weren't they doing this when he was alive, right? Because he'd have to give them permission, I guess, or something. And so as soon as he's gone, it's like, great, let's make a ton of money off of this guy's words. And that's that's really toxic in a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah, and it's opportunistic at the very least. And their response to that criticism is that they don't make that much off of it. I'm like, well, then it's not that important you do it. I think what happens, is there's this self-deception that sets in. And again, if you run a nonprofit or in ministry, you struggle with this all the time of like, you want to honor your mission and not hide it under a bushel. And so like someone like me tends to be awkward. Has this awkwardness around self-promotion, doesn't know what's right to do. And so I end up like stifling in unhelpful ways sometimes. So I get that it's hard to discern, but like if you go through this thought process saying, look, now is a hot moment. Now's a John Lewis moment. So we're going to use his words to amplify our brand because our mission is important. That's kind of the logic they must have gone through.
Yeah.
And to me, that's not a proper form of self-promotion. No. To me, it raises questions like, and I don't know what the easy answers are, but what is it? How do you use the words of other people in a way that shows respect that isn't just opportunistic? Yeah. So even if you waited a month and started selling that merch, it's a little better because it's not capitalizing on a sad moment, but there's still ethical questions that we have to ask.
I mean, to me, it's just it gets at this underlying exploitative relationship that capitalism puts us in all the time with each other, right? Yeah. So now you and I aren't in relationship. It'd be like, oh, hey, if Mark dies, like he said a bunch of cool things, I'm going to make a lot of money off of this, and I'm
you have my full permission to profit off your death. Because my dad was going to sell my words like hotcakes.
And I mean, they're really, to know that kind of lurking behind every relationship is this idea that somehow I'm going to profit off of you or profit off of, your words or our association, whatever. I mean, there really is sort of a sickness to that. And I think that it is so normal for us that we don't see it as a sickness. We just like, it's the way we, when we've talked about capitalism issues before, and we've said, we just assume that stuff like private property is the way the universe works. And no, that's not necessarily the way the universe works. But we just assume this about this sort of profiteering. Like, yeah, that's the way it works. Like, there's a cool moment. If I'm quick enough and smart enough and I see a business opportunity, I just jump in and I just make money and profit off of that.
Well, and there's also a question, like some people should be, like, I don't believe in copywriting words, like good trouble. I don't like, that's not where I want to go with this, but there's still like this respect of who has the most right to claim those words. So
Yeah.
to me, if the John Lewis Foundation, I don't know if there is one, decided after his death, if he set up a fund to sell merch with that, it's like, well, I might not find it as tasteful, but it's more reasonable for them to do it. And
Yeah.
let's assume that there's probably lots of T-shirts and masks with those words on it, and so Christian Left entered into competition
Right, exactly.
with people who probably have more of a right. So there's that piece of it too, that I don't think. It's like I saw a lot. We saw a lot of opportunism happen with George Floyd's death around ministry stuff.
Yeah.
And some organizations were able to raise a lot of money, and I don't begrudge the ones that are actually involved of police abolition and police reform, like should be have that money coming in. But other groups, like the ones we talked about a couple of weeks ago, raise money off of it. And I had that trouble. Like I had people asking to give me money, and I redirected them. So it's like part of me feels resentful when white people don't follow that same instinct. I'm like, white groups making money off of Black Death. It's just, you got to stop and think. Like you can't.
Right.
I didn't want a single new dollar coming into CPI
Yeah.
in the wake of George Floyd just because we're in proximity and we care about justice. Like, and I had people challenge me and say, like, well, no, it's okay. The mission of CPI is important, especially in a time like this. I'm like, you're right. It is important in a time like this, but not as important as these groups getting the money. Like, I feel like we have to have ethics around this instead of like, it's common practice, like in capitalism, for people to cash in on the words of the dead. Anyways.
Yeah. Well, all right. So we got some comments coming in.
Some comments. Gus, I got blocked by that page a couple of years ago after having an opinion that was further to the left of what they were saying. They're the worst.
Wow.
Literally.
Okay. Literally.
The worst.
Wow, so,
I think there are worsters, but yeah.
They're probably,
I've noticed that, like, you know, a lot of progressive space. I'm a radical, and I find that I get in a lot of arguments with liberals because they feel like I'm just out trying to go further left than them, just out of some sort of spite instead of ideological principle. And so defensiveness is real. Ceres writes, the capitalization comment is spot on.
Thank you.
Capitalism over conscience.
Mm-hmm.
Becca writes, makes me think of the characteristic of whiteness that takes on the perspectives of people of color on as its own after the fact.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so this was the point I think that Lace was really making, right? Was that, look, you guys have to look at what you're doing. And, you know, and she's very good at this. And, you know, if you go to her site, she asks a lot of super intelligent, insightful questions.
Yes.
You know, there's another woman, Candace. So bad with names. I need a whole list of names. Anyway, there's another Black woman that does a lot of similar work, you know, that I got to know because of a similar sort of thing where a bunch of these white women just went berserk over what she was saying because they were being so defensive, you know. And so, yeah, so Leis asked a lot of good questions. And, you know, she's not rude at all. She's not a troll.
She's not rude. She asks hard questions.
Right. She asks hard, good questions.
Yes.
And you're right, Becca. This notion of whiteness of just like, well, you know, because now I think it, I'm right. And so, you know, she came along. She asked these questions, and yeah, these people, you know, just had this incredibly hard time with it. And one of the fascinating things that I think we're seeing now, right, is that because there is this cancel culture thing that, I mean, we'd have to define even what that exactly is. It's now a buzzword. But, you know, we recognize that sometimes it can be problematic and toxic. That sort of becomes the first go-to thing when, you know, I don't like what somebody's saying to me. And, you know, that's just another form of defensiveness. And, you know, when somebody's asking you a very polite question, you know, and this it's okay to answer that. Like,
Mhm.
uh,
It well, let's get to some more comments, and I have another thing to throw out. Series writes, the irony of this capitalization trend is that the same people that are on that trend often don't support living wage, ask for discounts, bargain hunting at the expense of honoring the worth of someone's labor.
yeah, yeah.
Becca writes, it's like we ignore the critique by amplifying.
Yeah.
And Julia says, we need to relearn right relationship with everything, beginning with recognizing the sovereignty of beings in the natural world. Patriarchal capitalism has interrupted inherent connections to a healthy relational life. Amen.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's insidious.
Yeah.
Like the way in which everything is now transactional. And so we don't even have, when someone very humanly comes to challenge you in a way that is already vulnerable, asking a hard question, and you respond by shutting it down and then to maintain your transactional stuff, that's violence.
Yeah. And I understand that this whole arena of internet relationship and interaction is this brand new thing that is very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And in communication studies, we know that a huge percentage of relational communication is nonverbal cues, bodily experience of being with another person.
Mm-hmm.
And the internet removes all of that. And what that seems to clearly do is it releases a lot of the sort of inhibitions that people sometimes have, if you want to call it that, or the, thinking twice before you speak sort of thing. And also on the screen, there seems to be something very hard about language, like physically hard, not difficult. And it comes across in this very brittle, often with a more negative cast to it than the person can intend. And we read it in that way. And so, we're learning how to do this, but the goal still, I think, needs to be healthy relationship. And so it's not even so much about the content of what we're talking about, but it's that, okay, let's try to figure this medium out and how to have healthy relationship. And, part of that is that it's okay for people to ask questions about what you're doing and then to be able to respond to that and think about what they're saying and go, oh, maybe they've got an insight that I don't have, and maybe they've got a perspective that I'm not seeing. And that's actually great that we get to engage in relationship about that, rather than just feeling that sort of hard hit from screen communication and then, reacting in this very negative way.
Yeah, and this is part of the reality. So normally, if we're having a conversation in place, I can pick up on all sorts of subtleties that allow me to have a better sense of where you're actually coming from. If I can't see you and it's just words, something Jung would talk about all the time. It creates all sorts of space for projections because, like, I can't take the cues, so I have to provide them myself, which is just me dumping myself out onto you and putting my own meaning into your words. That happens all the time. So it's this great space of projection. So, like, when you get defensive white people, it's almost entirely this projection of our anxieties because this comes down to something Dan and I were talking about beforehand. We talk about all the time. Part of the problem, I think, is the way that we pathologize in Western culture this idea that rightness is tied to having correct thought, right? So it's getting our ideological ducks in a row and getting it right. So, and I see this all the time, and it tires me out. I can't imagine what it'd be like if I weren't a white man. But this tendency for white people to want to perform what they think it means to be an ally by getting everything right. And so the goal is to figure out what's all the right things for a white person to do and say, and I'm going to perform them. And then there's not a lot of room for transformation. Right. There's not a lot of vulnerability in that. And so then it becomes about And this is what I think is part of the accurate critique of woke culture or PC culture or whatever, is when people are so overemphasizing saying things the right way that becomes the goal rather than a transformed set of relationships. And so that's what happens. So then you get defensive because you have to maintain the facade of rightness.
And to me, this is directly tied to toxic Christianity. I mean, if you have to say everything right, or this invisible deity is going to zap you to hell if you happen to die in a car accident tomorrow, you know, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure to say everything right. And it, you know, and people internalize that. And yeah, I mean, part of, I'm sure, the ethos on the Christian left, I would not be surprised if there are a lot of folks there that are trying to get away from a more fundamentalist view of Christianity, but now they're still bringing that same thing. Oh, I have to do it right. And you know, it's it gets really crazy when all you're doing is then battling your projections, as you say. And and that whole thing of being aware of our projections is just something that is such a helpful thing, and we could all do a lot more of.
Yeah, and to me, this is like, okay, we need to practice and value a different set of things, especially in online discourse. Instead of valuing being right or being clever, valuing being humble and curious, being open to critique. Like, this is the other thing. Like, you just have to accept, if you're white in America around the issue of race, you have to accept the fact that you are going to mess up, and that the goal is to not avoid messing up.
Right.
That's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is for you to grow and learn and become healthy. And if you set that as your priority, then someone calling you out on behavior, like, you don't have to assume that they're right. Like, it's possible for someone to call you out for something and they're wrong. Like, that's possible. But you have to stay curious and say, like, this happened yesterday. So I've been critical, just to bring this in. My first reaction to Kamala Harris being chosen, which it wasn't even her being chosen, I assumed that would happen, but seeing all the excitement about it was like, excitement about centrism. And so I didn't say anything misogynistic or racist, but I did come out and say, I'm not a big fan of this, and I'm very disappointed. And I'm disappointed how excited people are. Someone challenged me and said that I was it was white male bullshit. Now, I don't think that's true, but I'm curious, like, is there some truth to that? And I have to sit with it, not because I'm like looking at my guts and worrying and being anxious about it, but saying, I got to be curious about what's making me tick, because I don't know all my processes. I'm not the sum total of my choices. That's bullshit. There's non-choices that happen all the time. And I have to be curious, because my goal here isn't to be right. It's to learn and grow. That's got to be how we do this thing.
Yeah, and that's the transformed relationship, right? That because if whiteness is all about relationships of domination and power, then transforming that is to say, no, you know, my new mode of relationship is egalitarianism, where there's more space, you know, where other people can critique me without fearing that I'm just going to bring the power and domination of whiteness down on them.
Yeah.
Right? And, you know, and the reaction to this is the perfect example, right? So, you know, here's this group, they've got 300,000 followers. It's not like, you know, Lace on Race is some giant threat to them. And, you know, it appears that the vast majority of energy goes into defending against the threat to learn and being open. And, you know, and that's that imperialistic impulse. We have to defend against threat at all costs. And, you know, that's not the new vision.
Some
all right, let's roll through some comments, and then we're gonna hold on time here and try to be disciplined.
Can I have a concrete ending?
A concrete ending.
CK writes, this is in the same vein as cultural misappropriation and how whiteness takes. Yeah, whiteness is a taking pathology, for sure.
Yeah.
Julia writes, capitalism teaches us to trespass.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Gus writes, to Dan's point about language on screens, I love pointing people to Key and Peele's video about misunderstanding text messages. I haven't seen that. I'm going to look that up. It's such a powerful tool for understanding how this happens.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Yeah.
this.
No, I mean, it's a really great thing to study and pay attention to.
Julia writes, and if you grew up in oral culture, body language and tone is the first tongue we learn.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
like speaking about kind of Germanic upper Midwestern culture, it's also very confusing because Germanic upper Midwestern white culture, especially rural, is very subtle. So we talk about passive aggression all the time, but what it is it's indirect ways of communicating. So you have to pick up all sorts of subtle cues. And it makes it hard when you translate that way of doing things to the internet. And so then all of a sudden you see Farmer Carl, who's always so polite and nice, being just a dick online because all of a sudden all that
He's been freed.
Yeah, so like this, it's almost like people are toddlers figuring out how to speak for the first time. Kathleen writes, wearing masks complicates our verbal interactions. It does. I think that's part of the resistance to it. My surviving daughter is deaf. This has been tough for her.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, learning new forms of communication is really challenging.
Catherine writes, I've been really curious about the way the internet.
She continues below there.
Arg, lol, the way the internet can erase distinctions between public and private. There's so much new learning for me there.
No.
Again, oh my God, it keeps posting early. The way stuff you say to one audience gets interpreted really differently by another. Catherine said, a difficult posting day.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it just, I, in my whole online life, I mean, to me, I feel like this is the thing that I spend more time thinking about than any content that I put up there is, how am I trying to relate to people? How am I trying to add little, clues, emojis, words, comments to convey certain feeling states, to try to make it very clear what is the intention behind what I'm saying. And it's very obvious to me when I fail in that and write something that's not clear. And I actually appreciate people pointing that out to me. And, I take stuff down, change stuff on a reasonably regular basis. And I would say that, 90% of the time it's this learning this new communication and community thing. But that to me is what's the most important thing. It's not about me being right about something. I mean, that's just, that's almost totally irrelevant.
Yeah, especially like it's interesting, even just getting nerdy about scriptures. The way right is talked about and translated in the scriptures, even in the New Testament, which uses Greek words, it has more to do with relationship, being right or righteous. This idea of being doctrinally correct, that's such a foreign idea that we've put into it, and it's dominated Christianity, especially Protestantism. Not that Catholicism is great in every fashion and form, but it's this problematic idea of just like having this disembodied spirituality that's about getting everything right, and that's just so unhealthy. It's messed up so much of our lives.
I mean, one of the interesting things about what we now call Judaism, and Judaism as a religion didn't really even exist in Jesus's time, but it's very hard for us to imagine that a religious tradition that is almost completely non-doctrinal. I mean, the Hebraic tradition, and even really Judaism to this day, is completely non-doctrinal, and that's something that is so foreign to us. Again, it's like imagining no private property. It's almost impossible for us to do it. Okay, we got 13 seconds.
Okay, I'll hold my other thoughts. Julie said, well said. What is the opposite of acting in domination and power? And it's not being weak. Instead of being dominating and powerful in that way, it's the power that comes from curiosity, humility, and growth and vulnerability. And sometimes you got to fight. but not out of a defense, not out of this, not this sort of dominating kind of way. Good luck, Mark, on pouring concrete. Hope all goes well. It's not really raining right now, so I'm guardedly optimistic. One last comment. This is our first Twitter comment.
Ooh, cool.
I opened it up on Twitter. I don't know who this person is and if this is a baited question, but Catholic social teaching equals communism? I wish. Definitely towards more humane democratic socialism, the best of Catholic social teaching, but unfortunately it doesn't go full communism like I'd like. And then
Catherine is having an empty thing. I think that's supposed to be teach, but it's Tia.
Or it could be yeah.
Or it could be
yeah. Having a difficult time posting. Well, all right. We're done for today.
We're done.
We will be back tomorrow.
Back tomorrow. All right.
Hopefully I won't be entombed in concrete and I'll be back.
There we go. There we go. It will be a weighty episode.
Nice.
Yeah.
See you.